Picture this: a 13-year-old boy, illiterate and broke, sleeping in French forests with nothing but the clothes on his back, walking nearly 300 miles to a city where he knew absolutely no one. Fast forward 35 years. That same person is standing in the ashes of everything he's built, staring at the charred remains of his workshop, his inventory stolen, his life's work reduced to rubble by war. He's 49 years old, and he's homeless again. Most people would quit. Most people would say the universe was telling them something. Most people would accept defeat. But Louis Vuitton wasn't most people. Because today, right now, as you're watching this, the brand bearing his name is worth $129 billion. It's the most valuable luxury brand on planet Earth. And it all started because a teenage runaway noticed something everyone else was too comfortable to question. One simple observation about luggage that the entire travel industry had somehow missed. If you appreciate stories about ordinary people who built extraordinary legacies through sheer determination, hit that like button right now and subscribe to The Sleeping Economist. We uncover the financial events and entrepreneurial journeys that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Walked to Paris. Louis Vuitton was born on August 4th, 1821, in Anche, a tiny village in the Jura region of eastern France. His family were farmers, carpenters, and modest craftspeople, hard-working but poor. His mother was a hat maker who taught young Louis to appreciate craftsmanship and quality work. When he was just 10 years old, she died. Life in the Vuitton household changed overnight. His father remarried, and Louis's new stepmother made it abundantly clear that she didn't want him around. The details of his home life aren't fully documented, but we know enough. At 13 years old, in the spring of 1835, Louis Vuitton made a decision that would change everything. He ran away from home with no money, no education, and no plan except to get as far away as possible. His destination? Paris, the city of lights, the capital of fashion, culture, and opportunity. There was just one problem. It was nearly 300 miles away, and he was traveling on foot. Can you imagine that journey? A 13-year-old boy walking alone through the French countryside for what would turn out to be 2 full years. He slept wherever he could find shelter in forests, under bridges, in barns when farmers would let him. He took odd jobs in villages along the way, trading manual labor for food and occasionally a few coins. He fixed broken things. He helped with harvests. He learned by watching craftsmen work. That journey, those 2 years of absolute survival, became Louis Vuitton's real education. He couldn't read or write, but he learned something far more valuable. How to observe, how to solve problems, how to persist when every rational voice tells you to give up. He learned that comfort was a luxury and adaptability was survival. He learned to look at ordinary objects and see how they could be improved. In 1837, at the age of 16, Louis Vuitton finally arrived in Paris. Dirty, exhausted, but unbroken. Most runaway children would have ended up as street urchins or factory workers. But Louis had a skill he'd been developing his entire journey. He could fix things, he could work with his hands, and he had learned to pay attention to detail. Through a stroke of luck, or perhaps divine intervention, he found work with Monsieur Romain Marechal, a master trunk maker and packer whose workshop served Paris's wealthiest elite. This wasn't just any job. In the mid-1800s, being a layetier, a specialized packer and trunk maker, was a highly respected craft. The wealthy traveled constantly, and they needed experts who could pack their belongings securely and create custom trunks that would survive rough voyages by horse-drawn carriage, steamship, and eventually railway. Louis Vuitton had found his calling, and he was about to spend the next 17 years learning everything there was to know about an industry that badly needed disruption. Chapter 2. The Apprentice Who Saw Everything. For 17 years, from 1837 to 1854, Louis Vuitton worked in Marechal's workshop, absorbing every detail of the trunk-making trade. But he wasn't just learning to make trunks. He was studying wealthy travelers. He watched how they packed. He listened to their complaints. He observed their frustrations. And he noticed a problem that everyone else had simply accepted as inevitable. The trunks of the era were designed with curved, dome-shaped lids. This design had a practical purpose. The rounded tops allowed rainwater to run off during outdoor travel and storage. For centuries, this had been the standard. Every trunk maker in Europe made them this way. It was simply how things were done. But Louis Vuitton saw the fatal flaw. Curved trunks couldn't stack. On ships, they wasted precious cargo space. In railway cars, they slid around and couldn't be organized efficiently. In hotel storage rooms, they created chaos. Travelers had to set them on the floor separately, each one taking up far more space than necessary. And because they couldn't stack, people couldn't bring multiple trunks without creating a logistical nightmare. In a world that was moving faster than ever before, with steamships crossing oceans and railways connecting cities, luggage had become the bottleneck. The Industrial Revolution was accelerating trade and travel at an unprecedented pace, but people were still using medieval trunk designs. Louis saw all of this. He saw the inefficiency, the wasted space, the frustration. But he was still an apprentice. He had no capital, no workshop, no authority to revolutionize an entire industry. Then, in 1853, something remarkable happened. Louis Vuitton's reputation for precision and discretion caught the attention of Empress Eugénie de Montijo, the Spanish-born wife of Napoleon III. She hired him as her personal boxmaker and packer. Suddenly, the runaway from Antibes was packing luggage for French royalty. Working directly with the Empress gave Louis something priceless: credibility, connections, and insights into how the most demanding travelers in the world approached their journeys. He saw firsthand that even the wealthiest people in France were frustrated by the limitations of traditional luggage. In 1854, at the age of 33, Louis Vuitton made his move. He left Marechal's workshop and opened his own business at 4 Rue Neuve des Capucines in Paris, near the luxurious Place Vendôme. The sign above his door read, "Louis Vuitton, manufacturer of travel trunks, packing cases, and luggage." He didn't just copy what everyone else was doing. He had spent nearly 2 decades preparing for this moment. He had watched, listened, learned. He had identified the flaw that the entire industry had accepted as unchangeable. Now it was time to prove that what everyone assumed was impossible was actually inevitable. The runaway teenager who had walked to Paris with nothing was about to change luxury travel forever. And he was going to do it with a deceptively simple innovation that would make traditional trunk makers laugh right up until they started losing customers. Chapter 3. The Flat Trunk Revolution in 1858. 4 years after opening his own workshop, Louis Vuitton released a product that would define his legacy: the world's first flat-top trunk. Instead of the traditional rounded lid, Vuitton's trunk featured a completely flat, rectangular design. He called it the Trianon trunk, covered in gray canvas that was both lightweight and waterproof. The flat top solved every problem he'd observed during his 17 years of apprenticeship. Stackable. Multiple trunks could be piled securely on top of each other in ship cargo holds, railway baggage cars, and hotel storage rooms. No more wasted space, no more sliding and shifting during transport. Lightweight. By using innovative canvas-covered poplar wood instead of heavy traditional materials, Vuitton's trunks were significantly lighter without sacrificing durability. Waterproof. Specially treated canvas kept contents dry even in the worst weather conditions, eliminating the original reason for curved lids. Airtight. Vuitton's precision craftsmanship created seals that protected valuable contents from moisture, dust, and even pests during long voyages. When Louis Vuitton first unveiled his flat-top design, traditional trunk makers laughed. They mocked him. How could a trunk without a curved top possibly keep water out? It violated centuries of established wisdom. It went against everything the industry knew to be true. But Louis Vuitton had done something revolutionary. He had questioned the assumption. He asked why when everyone else asked why not. He recognized that the curved top was a solution to a problem that no longer existed, or rather, that it created more problems than it solved in the modern transportation era. The customers understood immediately. Travelers who had struggled for years with inefficient luggage saw Vuitton's innovation and ordered by the dozens. Ship captains appreciated the space-saving design. Railway operators loved the stackability. Hotel porters found them easier to manage. And wealthy frequent travelers, the ones who had been most frustrated by traditional trunks, became Louis Vuitton's most loyal advocates. By the early 1860s, Louis Vuitton's workshop was overwhelmed with orders. He wasn't just making trunks. He was solving a fundamental problem that had plagued travelers for generations. In 1859, he expanded operations, opening a larger workshop in Aisne-sur-Seine, just outside Paris. This facility would become the heart of his growing empire. Business exploded. The Vuitton name became synonymous with innovation, quality, and luxury. Louis married, started a family, and watched his son Georges grow up in the workshop, learning the craft that had taken his father from poverty to prosperity. Everything was perfect. Louis Vuitton had escaped his abusive childhood, walked nearly 300 miles to Paris with nothing, survived years of poverty, apprenticed for nearly 2 decades, and built a thriving business based on a single brilliant observation. He had made it. He was successful, respected, financially secure. His future looked bright. And then, in 1870, war came to France, and everything Louis Vuitton had built was about to burn. Chapter 4. When Everything Burned. The Franco-Prussian War erupted in July 1870, pitting the French Empire against the Kingdom of Prussia and its German allies. It was a catastrophic conflict that would reshape European politics and destroy countless lives and businesses across France. Paris became a war zone. The Prussian army laid siege to the city, cutting off supply lines and bombarding French positions. The violence escalated dramatically during what became known as the Paris Commune, a revolutionary socialist government that briefly controlled the city. Buildings burned. Businesses were looted. Infrastructure crumbled. Louis Vuitton's workshop in Asnières was caught directly in the crossfire. Imagine watching your life's work, everything you built over 3 decades through sheer determination and innovation, reduced to ash and rubble. The workshop that Louis had designed and expanded. The inventory of trunks waiting to be shipped to customers. The tools and materials he had carefully collected. The designs and patterns that represented years of refinement. Gone. Making matters worse, during the chaos of war and revolution, thieves looted whatever hadn't burned. Valuable materials, finished products, even personal possessions stolen by opportunists taking advantage of the destruction. At 49 years old, Louis Vuitton found himself in almost the same position as that 13-year-old boy who had walked to Paris decades earlier. He had nothing again. Everything he owned had been destroyed or stolen. Most entrepreneurs would have seen this as a sign, a message from the universe that it was time to retire, to give up, to accept that fate had dealt a final, crushing blow. Louis had already achieved more than anyone could have reasonably expected from a poor, illiterate runaway. He could have walked away with his head held high, found other work, lived a quiet life. But here's what separated Louis Vuitton from everyone else. He had learned the most important lesson of resilience during those 2 years walking to Paris as a teenager. He had discovered that comfort is temporary, but the ability to persist through discomfort is permanent. He had been homeless before. He had started with nothing before. He had survived when survival seemed impossible before. The Franco-Prussian War had taken his workshop, his inventory, and his immediate financial security. But it hadn't taken the knowledge in his head, the skills in his hands, or the innovation that had made him successful in the first place. The war couldn't destroy the relationships he'd built with customers who trusted the Vuitton name. It couldn't erase the reputation for quality and innovation that he'd established over decades. Most importantly, the war hadn't changed the fundamental problem that Louis Vuitton had solved. Travelers still needed efficient, stackable, waterproof luggage. If anything, the post-war reconstruction boom would create even more demand for travel and trade than before. Louis Vuitton made a decision. He would rebuild, and he would rebuild bigger. Chapter 5. Rebuilding Bigger Than Before. Louis Vuitton didn't just rebuild his workshop. He relocated it to a prime location in Paris and expanded his operations. Where other business owners saw devastation and gave up, Louis saw opportunity. The post-war reconstruction era brought renewed economic activity, increased international trade, and a growing class of wealthy travelers eager to resume normal life. He refined his trunk designs even further. He introduced new canvas patterns to distinguish his products and make counterfeiting more difficult. Even in the 1870s, Louis Vuitton was fighting fake goods. He expanded his product line, creating specialized trunks for different types of travel, steamer trunks for ocean voyages, wardrobe trunks with hanging space, trunks designed specifically for the railway age. But perhaps most importantly, Louis Vuitton began preparing his son, Georges Vuitton, to take over the business. He taught Georges not just the technical craft of trunk making, but the philosophy that had made the business successful. Observe what frustrates people, question assumptions, and innovate relentlessly. When Louis Vuitton died in 1892 at the age of 70, he left behind more than a successful business. He left a legacy of innovation and a son who understood how to protect and expand that legacy. Georges Vuitton took over and immediately faced a new challenge: counterfeiting. As the Vuitton name became synonymous with luxury and quality, unscrupulous competitors began producing fake Vuitton trunks. Customers were being deceived, and the brand's reputation was at risk. Georges responded with an innovation as brilliant as his father's flat-top trunk, the LV monogram. In 1896, he created a distinctive beige and brown canvas pattern featuring interlocking L and V initials, along with floral motifs. This pattern was difficult to replicate and made authentic Vuitton products instantly recognizable. But Georges didn't stop there. He developed revolutionary anti-counterfeiting locks and security systems. In fact, the Vuitton locks became so famous for being unpickable that Georges publicly challenged Harry Houdini, the world's greatest escape artist, to break out of a locked Vuitton trunk. Historical records don't clearly document whether Houdini ever accepted the challenge, but the publicity was brilliant marketing. Georges expanded the business internationally, opening stores in major cities around the world. He marketed Louis Vuitton as not just luggage, but as a symbol of sophisticated travel and refined taste. He understood that his father hadn't just been selling trunks, he'd been selling a solution to travelers' frustrations and an aspiration to the lifestyle those travelers represented. By the early 20th century, Louis Vuitton was more than a brand. It was a cultural icon, recognized globally as the pinnacle of luxury travel goods. The company survived both world wars, economic depressions, and countless shifts in fashion and technology. Today, Louis Vuitton is part of LVMH, the world's largest luxury goods conglomerate, and is valued at approximately $129 billion. Chapter 6. One insight built over a lifetime. So what can we learn from the story of Louis Vuitton? First, constraints can become your education. Louis Vuitton couldn't afford formal schooling, but his 2-year walk to Paris taught him observation, problem-solving, and persistence. He learned to watch how things worked, identify inefficiencies, and survive uncomfortable situations. Sometimes the struggles we think are holding us back are actually building the skills we'll need later. Second, master your craft before disrupting it. Louis didn't open his workshop after a few months of apprenticeship. He spent 17 years learning every aspect of trunk making, studying customer behavior, and understanding the industry's assumptions. He earned the expertise that gave his innovations credibility. Third, question assumptions, especially ones everyone accepts. The curved trunk lid was industry standard for centuries. No one questioned it because that's how it's always been done. Louis asked a simple question: why? And when he examined the answer to shed rainwater, he realized the solution had become a bigger problem than the original issue. Fourth, resilience isn't about avoiding disaster. It's about rebuilding after disaster strikes. Louis Vuitton lost everything at 49 and rebuilt bigger than before. He didn't have the luxury of saying, "This isn't fair," or "I'm too old to start over." He had survived worse before, and he knew how to persist. The question isn't whether you'll face setbacks. You will. Fifth, protect your innovations. Louis created the flat-top trunk, but Georges created the systems to protect the brand, the monogram, the anti-counterfeiting locks, the marketing that made Vuitton synonymous with luxury. Innovation without protection is just free R&D for your competitors. Finally, solve real problems, not imaginary ones. Louis Vuitton didn't innovate for the sake of being different. He solved a genuine frustration that travelers experience daily. His product succeeded because it made people's lives genuinely better. Ask yourself, does this solve a real pain point? Louis Vuitton's story isn't just about luggage. It's about observation, persistence, innovation, and the refusal to accept that the way things are is the way things must always be. If stories like this, where we uncover the economic events that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, fascinate you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started with these financial educational mysteries.